Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 189th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And this month's theme is Please Don't Do It. All about systemic organisational messes, organisations in disarray that impact incredibly negatively on staff and their well-being. And this week, I'm speaking to the wonderful Donna Patterson. She is also a TEDx speaker, and she spoke at TEDx London Women. Yes, an enormous achievement, and I'm so excited to have her with us. Donna is a mum to 2 young children and the founder of an organisation called Let's Talk Work, an organisation which helps individuals ensure their rights at work are met. And Donna's story is incredible. It hit the headlines last year after she successfully won an Employment Tribunal claim against Morrisons, one of the largest supermarkets in the UK, where she worked as a buyer. In 2020, Donna experienced discrimination while pregnant. And again, when she came back to work after her maternity leave, and she was contracted to work part-time and she was forced to work full-time, which led to her initially lodging a complaint and ultimately representing herself in an employment tribunal. Now, Donna combines her negotiation skills as a former buyer for both Morrisons and Asda with her experience of self-representation in court to help others navigate their workplace challenges and find ways to resolve workplace issues. Not only does she demystify the self-employment tribunal process, but she also supports people to have difficult conversations at work to help find solutions and drive change in how employers treat working parents. I am so excited. Donna, a huge welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's so great to be here, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to chat with you.
Well, we're super excited. Of course, we know you've come. I was saying in your intro, you've done TEDx London Women, which is like, one of the pinnacles. So, Donna, we are truly honoured for you to be here with us. And I've read out your bio, but I'm wondering if you could tell the listeners a bit more about what you're working on at the moment and how things are going for you.
Yeah, so I am on a mission to really raise awareness about what I went through and why I had to raise an employment tribunal claim on the grounds of discrimination. And then what I've done subsequently, which is setting up Let's Talk Work. So that's an organisation that I've created to help other people that find themselves in a similar situation to the one that I found myself in, where I was working in an environment and nobody was listening to the issues that I was raising, which ultimately led me to raise an employment tribunal claim on the grounds of maternity and sex discrimination, and then ultimately constructive dismissal. And I guess my frustration is that, unfortunately, so many people are unaware of what their rights are in the workplace, that they don't know how to advocate for themselves, or they don't think that they're actually entitled to. And I think also it can result in a bit of apathy and just acceptance of the toxic and discriminatory working environments that we often find ourselves in. And I just really want to help as many people as possible to ensure that their rights are being met in the workplace. I just think it's important that people believe that it is worth speaking up. You are able to make a difference. I truly believe it doesn't matter where you are in the hierarchy in organisations, you are able to challenge back and ask questions. I think we're so often conditioned to believe that we need to keep quiet and we need to turn a blind eye to things that we're seeing and hearing. And I don't think that things are going to change unless we start asking questions.
It's so true, Donna. And, listeners will know from hearing me talk on the podcast when I worked at, universities and the things that I saw, which I don't want to sort of go into in great detail, but you're absolutely right. People don't know their rights at work. Many people don't. I found that in London, people really did. I find that in other places, interestingly, people really don't. So you're absolutely right. And can you talk about the difference between going to an employment solicitor and coming to Let's Talk Work?
Yeah, of course. So, the one fundamental difference is the price, but the other is the fact that a solicitor is obviously legally trained and qualified. They know the in-depth intricacies of employment law, but they don't necessarily have that human element. They've probably, most possibly, not gone through it themselves in the terms of they haven't actually raised a tribunal claim on their own, in their own situation. But they've represented lots of clients, for example. So that human element just isn't there, in that they possibly won't empathise to the extent that I can, having personally gone through it and had that experience of representing myself without the legal knowledge and know-how. So that's the difference you'll get, in that I can really relate on a personal level, and there's an understanding there of how out of your depth you can feel, how that you are more often than not the least experienced person at each stage of the process. If you are going through an employment tribunal, you'll be dealing with solicitors, possibly barristers and judges who are doing this day in and day out. They know the law, they know the processes, the procedures, the language, and that's something I can very quickly clarify and clear up for people, because that's something I personally found really overwhelming throughout the whole process. I just didn't know where to go to easily get answers to what are now, to me, straightforward questions. And sometimes I think solicitors, because they are living it and breathing it every day, they overlook perhaps how much impact the lack of knowledge can have on your confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. And I think legal terminology can feel very alien to those of us who are not trained in the legal profession. It also takes an incredibly strong stomach, if I can use that phrase, to go to tribunal. And it's really hard, and it takes a huge emotional toll. So during that process, Donna, how did you look after yourself?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It is grueling, and I am very conscious that I don't want to be seen as somebody that is going around saying that everybody should raise an employment tribunal claim. It is really incredibly important that everybody considers their own personal circumstances, their situations, whether they have the capacity, the energy, the resources, because there is no shame whatsoever in not pursuing an employment tribunal claim, or pursuing one and then stopping it because it's just too grueling and it's taking too much of a toll. Ultimately, the most important thing is that the individual person is taken care of, and that they can get the closure that they need. And if that means stopping it halfway through, or settling even and signing a non-disclosure agreement, then so be it, as long as you know that you tried your best and you put up that fight and you challenge back. And I think that that is the most important thing. In terms of how to protect yourself, I guess I am a really self-aware person. So I can recognise when I'm starting to feel overwhelmed, out of my depth. And once I see that happening, I am good in that I will seek help and advice. And I have a few very, very close friends who I can speak to about anything, whether it be the employment tribunal or other things in life. And they have a really sympathetic and understanding ear. But I think it's really important to be able to recognise those people in your life who are understanding and will listen, and those that possibly might have more of a negative impact, and being able to differentiate between the two. Because when you're going through something like this, it's really important to surround yourself with positive, caring people, as opposed to the more negative, risk-averse people. And that was something I was mindful to do, because there were people in my life who, possibly with good intentions, were telling me to just move on with it and drop the case. And I just personally couldn't do that, because I knew in the future how I would feel if I didn't challenge back after what I had been subjected to. The other thing that I'm a really big believer in is if you can access it, counselling, I believe, is really, really helpful and can make such a difference and help you just process things that you don't know how to process yourself. And then I just think it's really important to, I know it's a cliche, but to be kind to yourself and not to beat yourself up about it and have that self-belief in yourself.
Thank you so much, Donna. And, I just want to re-emphasize what you did being huge, that you didn't have legal representation in your employment tribunal. You represented yourself and you had support from Pregnant Then Screwed. But that's very rarely heard of in the UK. So again, how is that experience? Was the judge a bit like, wait a second, this is really weird, what's going on here? Because this is massive.
Yeah, you are right that self-representation is not for the faint-hearted at all. And I will be clear in that it wasn't my preferred option. I did not set out to represent myself. I did pursue other avenues. So I got great advice that with a number of insurance policies that you may have taken out legal protection, which I did. So I applied for that legal protection and I filled out all the paperwork and jumped through all the hoops, and they assessed my case with all of the evidence that I had, and they decided that the odds were not in my favour, therefore they weren't going to represent me, which was a bit of a blow, and it did knock my confidence. But I felt by that stage I'd got that far that I just couldn't back down. I then explored actually paying for a solicitor myself, but at £300 an hour, that was the cheapest price I got. I just was too concerned about how many hours might rack up in actually pursuing the claim. And then finally, I did look into no win, no fee solicitors, but those that I spoke to really wanted to go down the route of a settlement agreement, which more often than not would come with a non-disclosure agreement, which I just felt so strongly about not signing, because essentially a non-disclosure agreement is a gagging order. So that organisation is going to gag you from speaking about what happened to you and the experience that you went through. And for me, it was never about the money. It was always about making my former employer face into and listen to and acknowledge what they did to me, and that was wrong. So yeah, I didn't want to self-represent, but by process of elimination, it became the only option in order to continue with my claim. Pregnant Then Screwed, the charity that are out there to help predominantly mothers who are facing discrimination in the workplace, were phenomenally supportive. The amount of advice that they provide and the sharing that they do of other people that are successful really motivated me to keep going. I believe that if other people had been successful, then I too could be successful. Now, it required hours of preparation. I was up until really late at night. I would scour documents. I was pulling together evidence. I was familiarising myself with the whole process of an employment tribunal, what was involved step by step, so that I felt as prepared as I possibly could be when I was in that courtroom. And actually, you mentioned the judge and what the judge's response was. And despite how grueling and draining that week was, there was some glimmers of positivity throughout the week. And one of them was the recognition from an employment tribunal judge who has over 20 years experience, when they told me that I had presented the case in such a way that it was clear that the evidence showed that I had been discriminated against. And in fact, I was complimented on my understanding of the Equality Act. And I took that as a personal win, because it meant a lot to me for that to be recognised.
Yeah, that is amazing. And judges don't tend to say these things very often, do they? And there was a recent case with the climate change gas and oil campaigners, and the judge said, I can see you're very nice people. So it does happen. And that is brilliant, Donna. And I think, of course, I know that you know this, we've got to hold on to the Equality Act for dear life, because
Yes.
it is the backbone of protecting people and workers' rights, and not just workers' rights, but in service, in education, employment, etc.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think it's so important for people to be familiarising themselves with the Equality Act. And it's really sad, myself included, that I had an awareness that it existed, but I didn't understand how it could protect me as a person. And I think that is a real shame at how little we all know about our rights and our entitlements. And employers go to great lengths and spend lots of money on all singing, all dancing policies, but the senior management don't actually follow the policies, and the employees don't understand the policies or familiarise themselves with them, because we're all so busy doing the job. But a lot of these organisations don't actually prioritise making their workforce clear about what they are and are not entitled to. And that was one of the things that I was able to successfully do to provide evidence in my case, was to identify in these great policies that my former employer had, where they hadn't actually even followed them, which really frustrated the judge, because what is the point of having them if you're not going to adhere to them? Yeah.
It's a very classic case, isn't it? And I often think that, of course, you're going to have policies. Policies are rooted in case law, and best management practices. But why do they just sit on the dusty virtual shelf? And I also find it really interesting, Donna, because there is so much information out there. People can type in a term related to employee relations, whether it's positive, proactive, reactive, anticipatory, and find all the information, from Harvard Business Review to blogs to anything in between. Now, of course, there's a bit of fact checking required, but there is a lot of very good information out there. So, in your case, where you'd had a job offer rescinded after you revealed you were pregnant, and then when you returned from maternity leave, you were expected to work a full-time job despite being contracted for only part-time hours in pay. That's really basic to me, in the sense of your requests were within, your contract. This is very clear cut. So what is going on? Why was this happening still, in your opinion? And why are workplaces in such disarray when we have so much information and at our fingertips?
I think the problem is that many organisations don't necessarily prioritise the people. They are so focused on metrics like sales, profit, growth. So by focusing on them, they deprioritise critical things like their people, and poor decisions are then made because these organisations are not necessarily focused on what is most important, and that is looking after the people. Because without a workforce, you have no company. And the other issue, I think, come up time and time again, and that is that skills such as empathy and compassion just are not valued. And in fact, I think sometimes they can be perceived as weakness. Whereas I'm a big believer in, if leaders display compassion and empathy, a lot of these poor decisions could be avoided. There's a massive, massive opportunity for employers to do better. But it's going to take a lot of action in order to change the attitudes and well-established behaviours that are in place. And these organisations are going to need to put the same emphasis that they put on the high-profile metrics like sales and profits, like I've said, and applying the same emphasis on achieving equity for their people. And I just think that there needs to be a complete shift and change. People shouldn't be working in an environment where they feel scared to speak up and ask questions. I think a real issue at the moment is that people don't feel psychologically safe at work, and the repercussions of that are absolutely huge. The fear environment, I think, exists in so many different organisations, and it's a real issue. But I feel strongly that people shouldn't allow that to stop them from speaking up and asking questions. And the hierarchical structures that are in place shouldn't be preventing people from ensuring that their rights are met. We are entitled. It's just, I think, the lowest thing that people should operate at is treating each other like human beings. And like you mentioned there, the things that happened to me were fundamental to the contract that I had in place. My employment, I had a part-time contract. It was established for 3 years. So how on earth could anybody think that I could be expected to complete a full-time role? But I do believe that there was just a lack of compassion and empathy and willingness to compromise. And that resulted in that company being taken to an employment tribunal.
Well, it's basic, isn't it? Like if someone has a part-time contract, you can say to them, would you like to go full-time? They say no, you go, okay. I mean,
And ironically, that conversation never actually even happened.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, the cynic in me could say that it was a cost-saving exercise.
Oh, yeah, because,
of course. Why wouldn't you try to, I mean, there are lots of reasons why you shouldn't, but if an organisation time and time again gets away with forcing somebody to complete a full-time role for a part-time salary, why would they not continue doing it? They shouldn't, because it's morally and ethically wrong. And more importantly, it's legally wrong. It's breaking the law. But I'm not the first that has happened to.
This is the thing. And like you said, this is resulting. So you had to take sick leave, of course, understandably due to stress before your tribunal. And, this causes mental ill health. So I talk about a lot in this podcast how work can be, if things are in place and you have a supportive line manager and the environment is positive, part of the recovery package. But of course, we know it can also create mental ill health, as your example shows. And so when someone is really struggling, and often when you're really, really low, you just don't even know where to turn. So what do you think the biggest challenges are in accessing support? And if anyone's listening out there now, what are some small steps they could take to support themselves in that moment where they think, I don't even know what to do, I'm off sick, I'm exhausted, I can't cope?
I guess like we've spoken about before, it's really important to try, if you can, surround yourself with a strong support network, whether that be friends, family, and if there is an applicable charity like Pregnant and Screwed were there for me, if you're raising a claim on the grounds of another protected characteristic, if there's a charity in place for that protected characteristic, go to them, because I'm sure they will have lots of resources available to help support you and give you that confidence boost to keep challenging back, because I do think that that's really important, but not at the sacrifice of your mental health. And you're right, it massively impacted me. And again, another piece of evidence that I was able to demonstrate to the court was that on 10 separate occasions, I raised awareness to my organisation that I was struggling, that this was impacting me, that I was really having a hard time because I couldn't make childcare plans, and just the unpredictability was causing me a lot of stress. And despite flagging that up on numerous different occasions, I was able to show the Employment Tribunal that the company did nothing. There was a complete neglect of their duty of care. And what I think happens a lot of the time is that mental health in the workplace is treated as a tick box exercise. So if these employees don't put proper foundations in place, managers, for example, will just palm somebody off with, here's a leaflet, have a look at this website. phone this telephone number, but they don't actually properly offer support to that person and check in with them and ensure that the right things are being put in place. It comes back again to treating each other like human beings, being empathetic and having compassion for another person that is struggling and taking the necessary action to support them. I think what also doesn't help is that we have a really unhealthy belief that overworking and being busy are the only ways to prove your worth to your employer. And I do unfortunately think that there is still a taboo for a lot of people about the impact that it might have on their future career if they do disclose that they are struggling and having a hard time. And that just shouldn't be the case. And I think if you were working in an organisation where you felt safe and secure, that possibly wouldn't come up. I read a statistic actually recently, and it's just frightening, that 58% of people trust a stranger more than they trust their manager. And I think that speaks volumes.
And part of me is not hugely surprised to hear that, to be honest.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, there's just so much in what you've said and so much I've seen. You know, I haven't been through an employment tribunal myself. You'll know from my TEDx talk, I chose to leave. I think that it just doesn't make any sense to me. I find the whole thing bizarre. And so on that then, you know, what do you think are the key tenets of negotiation when it comes to your rights at work? So let's say something's changed for someone and they're thinking, wait a second, this doesn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
They do a bit of investigation. I think, oh no, this isn't right. How would you suggest they start negotiating and having that conversation with their manager?
Well, if they wanted to, they could contact me. But failing that, if they just want to have a go themselves, I would advise preparation is key. So like you've just mentioned, familiarising themselves with and educating themselves with information, reading up about things, really familiarise yourself with the policies that your employer has probably spent a lot of money putting in place, but don't actually live by, so that you're able to actually articulate where the company aren't meeting their own obligations that they've put in place. Be really clear on what your rights are, plan out what it is that you want to say, also know what outcome that you want to achieve. Do you want to remain working there? Do you want to move to a different team? You know, what is the outcome that you want? And it's really important to believe in yourself. You are a very, very capable person, and that employer has hired you for the skills that you offer, and it will cost them a lot of money to replace you. So try to remember that. I know it's really hard when you feel like you haven't got any power and they've got all the power, but that isn't the case all of the time. So have some self-belief, and with the right preparation, you know, you can have these conversations.
And I guess it's also thinking about the fact that you might feel alone, but you're not alone. And I would also say if people are part of trades unions, to speak to your trade union, join them now, because of course they can really help you with that as well, can't they?
Absolutely. And do you know what? So many people have said that to me, and I've read so many comments of, oh, well, if she'd have been in a trade union, this would never have happened. And it's funny because throughout my career, I've always worked in buying, in retail, and it's always been like an elephant in the room that nobody spoke about. In head office, there was never any discussion or conversation about trade unions, but it was always widely understood that colleagues that worked in stores or in the warehouse or distribution centres, for example, were always part of a trade union. And there was just never a conversation, or it was not common knowledge that trade unions were an option for the staff that worked in the head office. So I had at the time not a great understanding of how I could access a trade union or which trade union would be applicable to me. But if you have got one, and I know that in many industries they are very common, absolutely speak to them. But also, I would say, don't let them hold you back, because I have heard some stories from people where they have approached trade unions and they've been a little bit cautious. I think it's just really important to know your rights, know what it is that you want to achieve, and seek out all the advice and help that you can get, but stay true to what it is that you want.
I think that's such excellent advice, Donna, and I've seen that myself. I've seen both sides of the coin, or that the trades union reps, particularly in certain slices of academia, they're just too overwhelmed, so they can't get to everyone fast enough. So yeah, I think it's a multi-pronged approach, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. It's absolutely a multi-pronged approach, and that's certainly something I felt when I was in the depths of preparing for my tribunal hearing. I just felt that I was, I had involvement in as many different organisations and options as possible to inform myself, which was really how I became convinced that Let's Talk Work is something that is needed, because there was many a time where I thought, I wish I could just speak to somebody about this, rather than having to go to 10 different avenues to try to get the answer I was looking for. So yeah, multi-pronged approach is a great description.
and now you're kind of on the other side, you've got Let's Talk Work. It's still a lot to hold. So how do you look after your own mental health, Donna, and what are the top 3 tips that you'd like to share with listeners today?
So at the risk of it sounding basic, I just try to be aware of how I'm feeling and taking myself away from something when I'm feeling that it is getting too much. Having someone that I can really truly trust to speak to about things. I am quite a transparent person anyway, so I don't really hold back from getting things off my chest. And I think that's really important, not to internalize things and allow them to tie you up in knots. I remember a colleague said many years ago, a problem shared is half somebody else's. And I do think it's helpful to just try and share the load around. And then there are some other really incredibly basic things that I have found have helped me in the past, which is exercise. It's not something I particularly enjoy, but I do feel it's something that distracts my mind, and it allows me to feel that I have control over something when I feel so out of control elsewhere in my life. Again, another basic one is music. I think it really can press a reset button for me. I had a playlist that I used to listen to while I was preparing for my tribunal, and it was a lot of probably cliched, empowering songs, but they really did give me a boost and think, yes, I've got this in me. I can do this. And then one final thing, it can be pricey, but I've certainly used it a few times in my life and it has helped, and that's acupuncture. I find that that's a real great help for anxiety. And yeah, it surprised me actually how much impact it can have. So that's just a little flavour of some of the things that I do.
Brilliant. And as I always say, I love asking that question because no one has exactly the same 3 tips. So we've not had acupuncture before, and I couldn't agree more. I find acupuncture haven't had it for years, but yeah, for my migraines, I found it really, really useful. So yeah, whatever works for you, I think is the key there. And actually there's lots of research evidence about acupuncture. So brilliant. So if people want to know more about you, they want to connect with you, they want to contact you, and I will of course include these in the show notes, how should they do that?
Well, I would love that. That would be great. And you can contact me on Instagram. So my account is lets.talk.work. I'm also on LinkedIn as Donna Patterson. And then my website is www.letstalkwork.co.uk.
Brilliant, Donna. Thank you so much for your time. And, you have been a superstar talking about what you've been through on Women's Hour on Radio 4. So I cannot emphasize enough how honoured I have been to have you with us, talking so openly about your experiences. And I know that this is going to give so many people strength and ideas, and hopefully employers to think, sugar, we really need to be putting our policies where our mouth is. And actually it makes business sense. If you want to save costs, this is a bit of a no-brainer, isn't it?
Absolutely. There are so many benefits to organisations. You are sending a really good message out to your workforce. If people are treated well, they're not going to want to leave. And you're going to retain staff and talent. And I just think there are lots of benefits to be had. And I think some of it are just quick and easy wins. And yeah, I'd like to say thank you to you for having me on. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. And you too are also doing lots of really important work out there. So yeah, more power to us.
Oh, what a brilliant way to end. Thank you so much, Donna. And don't forget, listeners, keep joining us this month. We're talking about, please don't do that, employer blunders and what can be done about it. Until then, take care, everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.